All right. So here's the urinary system. So its function, it's one of probably overall, its main function would be excretion. Okay, it helps you remove waste from your body. Okay, you got to have a way to get rid of metabolic waste, and not all of them are going to be uh, filtered out as you eat through your digestive system. Many things that are actually kind of in your bloodstream or in your tissues and need to get filtered out of your body, and those will be removed through your urinary system. Okay, the primary organ for your excretion, those are the kidneys. So 4 functions, they're essential to homeostasis or balance. Those include excretion of those metabolic wastes, preserving your balance between water and salt, maintaining your acid and base balance, and secreting hormones. Okay? All those help creating equilibrium or balance or homeostasis in your body. Urinary system. So here we're excreting metabolic waste. So with excreting the metabolic waste, one of those is urea. And this is basically something that happens as a result of metabolizing your amino acids. And ammonia is going to combine with CO2, carbon dioxide, and that's how you make urea, or how your body makes urea. And it is a less toxic version or form of ammonia. Okay, ammonia is very toxic, right? And even though many of us have ammonia in our homes, we've got to be really careful, so we don't have exposure to folks in high doses, right? So urea is a less toxic form. All right, creatinine. It's a result of breaking down creatine phosphate. Okay, it's an energy storage molecule, and basically phosphates can get transferred to ATP for that. So anybody, if you've ever worked in a medical facility, someone is basically taking a urine sample, you see the results. Oftentimes you'll see urea levels on there, you'll see creatinine levels on there. So that's what this is. All right, uric acid happens when you break down nucleotides. It's an insoluble chemical, so it doesn't dissolve. All right, and related to uric acid is the condition gout. Anybody heard of anybody getting gout before? Okay. Yes.
His joint got really it was pretty
Yes. So this happens when you get excess uric acid in your joints. Okay, so uric acid, you're not really supposed to have acid in your joints. Okay, so, and it's like crystallized acid. So, it's very painful. It's painful not just because it's acid, but it's also in a crystalline form, and so it's just very, very painful. Okay. All right. One of those functions we talked about with homeostasis in the urinary system was preservation of water-salt balance. All right, so one thing that's closely associated with your salt and water balance is the volume of your blood. And salts have the ability to cause osmosis, which is what? Diffusion of, anybody remember? Diffusion of water. Okay, more salts that are in your blood, greater your blood volume. Okay, so if you drink or eat a lot of sodium, okay, what's going to happen if you have a lot of sodium? Typically what happens, let's say, to your weight if you eat a lot of sodium? Goes up. Is it taking in sodium, is all that weight fat and your weight goes up? No, a lot of it's actually water. You're retaining the water and makes your weight go up. Okay. And you know, some of that is okay, but I mean, obviously you don't want your sodium levels to get too high, right? Increase your blood pressure, right? Kidneys also have other ions in the blood. Okay, ions like potassium, you have bicarbonate ions help you in terms of maintaining your pH levels. All right, calcium ions. Part of maintaining water salt balance also has to do with maintaining your blood pressure. So your kidneys can impact your cardiac output, like how much fluid is going through your system in a minute, by regulating the volume of the blood. Okay, the kidneys are going to influence what we call peripheral resistance, right? Around the body. I believe we talked about that in the discussion of the cardiovascular system, by producing the hormone renin. And renin activates angiotensin. And what does angiotensin do? It constricts your blood pressure or blood vessels. And if you constrict blood vessels, what do you think that does to blood pressure? Would it go up or go down? You gotta constrict the blood vessel, blood pressure gonna go up or go down? Tighten them up. Probably gonna go up if you tighten them up. Okay. All right. More on maintaining acid-base balance. Here, the kidneys will excrete hydrogen ions. Okay, hydrogen ions are essentially kind of how we interpret pH or acidity from your blood into your urine. Okay, so that's one way you regulate acid-base balance, by getting rid of some acid. And kidneys will reabsorb bicarbonate ions, which is more of a base, return them to the blood. Again, these are ways your body keeps your blood from getting too acidic. All right, secretion of hormones. So here we can release renin when the blood supply decreases. So again, you have less blood, okay, that's going to make your blood pressure kind of go down. Renin is going to make it kind of go back up. You maintain your blood pressure where it's supposed to be. All right, erythropoietin. Okay, so this is going to be released when your ability of your blood to carry oxygen goes down, and stimulates your body to make red blood cells. And what do red blood cells do? What do they do? What do they carry? Red blood cells carry oxygen. All right. So again, if the oxygen carrying capacity gets too low, you make more red blood cells. Okay, kidneys can help activate vitamin D. If y'all remember from our discussion of the endocrine system, vitamin D is a precursor to what we call calcitriol. And calcitriol helps to promote absorption of calcium. Okay. So we've talked about acid-base balance. Let's take a break, talk to your partner about what you learned about that. You can do this at home as well. All right, so after we've kind of gone over acid-base balance and water salt balance, let's move on to urinary system organs. So again, the primary excretory organ in the urinary system are the kidneys. So they're paired organs, which basically means you have two of them, all right? So they're typically located in the lumbar region of your body. And they're considered retroperitoneal, which means they are covered by the parietal peritoneum. Okay, retro is sort of like going back, right? Like we're talking about clothes being retro or music being retro. In a sense, it's in the peritoneum, covered by the parietal peritoneum in your lower abdominal area, but it's retro in the sense that it's toward the back, it's covered. Okay. All right, and it's held in place by what we call renal fascia. It's connective tissue. It's covered by what we call renal capsule. Okay. So that's the outer lining. Structure in the kidney, or you have the hilum, and at the hilum you'll have renal arteries entering, and you'll also have renal veins and ureters exiting. Okay. So in terms of structures, here are your kidneys. What do? They produce urine. Okay, you can see here renal artery, renal vein. And from the kidney, once they filter out that urine, it goes through the ureters. They transport that urine to the urinary bladder, which stores it until you're able to pass it outside. And it goes out of your urinary bladder to your urethra. Okay, and just to orient yourself, here's your inferior vena cava, here's your descending aorta. Okay. All right, so now we covered the kidneys, let's talk about the ureters. And they extend, again, from the kidney to the bladder, and help you transport urine. They have layers to them. Okay. So the lining of the ureter, you have an inner layer, which is called a mucosa. It's a mucous membrane. Middle layer or intermediate layer is smooth muscle. Outer layer is fibrous connective tissue. Your urinary bladder in the pelvic region of your body or pelvic cavity, and its function is to store your urine. You have 3 openings for your urinary bladder. Okay, you have 2 for those ureters, okay, from either side of your body. 1 for the urethra, so basically 2 for urine to come in, 1 for urine to come out. You also have a structure called a trigon, and it's an area at the base of your bladder. It's outlined by those various openings. Okay, muscle layer to the urinary bladder. Okay, it's called detrusor muscle. And it's in the middle layer of the bladder. And the fibers are circular. You also have 2 layers. It's surrounded by 2 layers of longitudinal muscle. So basically, longitudinal, circular, longitudinal. Okay. You have a layer of mucosa, and that mucosa is made up of transitional epithelium. And transitional epithelium is basically pillowy, okay? And it's fluffy or looks fluffy when the bladder's empty, and it gets more stretched when the bladder's full. Okay, you've got different sphincters to control entrance and exits. All right, so you have an internal sphincter around the opening to the urethra. So you're able to sort of control fluid moving into the urethra. You also have an external sphincter, which is composed of skeletal muscle. All right, so there's a mixture of both voluntary and involuntary control of urine moving into the urethra. Okay. Okay, so on the urethra, it extends from your urinary bladder to the outer opening of your body. So in males, it's about 20 centimeters long, okay? And It's encircled by prostate gland. Okay, it's going to carry urine. Males urinating, and sperm from the males ejaculating. For females, the urethra is only about 4 centimeters long. Okay, just to the length it needs to be to the opening of the body. All right, and it is prone in females to bacterial infection. Okay, so we've talked about kidneys, we've talked about ureters, we've talked about urinary bladder, we've talked about the urethra. Okay, so let's take a break, talk to your partners about those structures. You can do this at home as well. All right, so now that we've covered organs of the urinary system, let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of the urinary system. Let's talk a little bit about physiology. So urination from an anatomy standpoint is also known as micturition. So during micturition, you actually have stretch receptors in your bladder. All right, and they get stimulated when your bladder fills up. Okay, so they feel the stretching in the urinary bladder, and it sends a signal to your nervous system. And so you get nerve impulses that go to your spinal cord, and your spinal cord is essentially going to send signals back to the urinary bladder and tell it to contract and tell the sphincters to relax so your urine can get out. So it's going to basically squeeze the bladder and allow the opening to open. All right. So we've talked about the anatomy of the urinary system in general. Now let's talk about the kidney in particular. So kidney's got 3 basic regions: cortex, medulla, and pelvis. All right. Now, structure that you need to know about in the kidney is the nephron. Nephron essentially is a network of renal tubes or tubules. Structures in the nephron you need to be familiar with are the afferent arteriole, the glomerulus, efferent arteriole, and the peritubular capillary network. We'll show you what that looks like. All right. So again, the lining of the kidney is the capsule. Okay, the structure just beneath the capsule is the cortex. And renal is a word you'll see that means kidney. All right. So got the cortex. Okay, this inner layer is the medulla. And the medulla is typically where you're going to find the structures we call renal pyramids. Like this is a pyramid, that's a pyramid. This is your pelvis, where your renal artery and vein and your ureter are. Now in the nephron, if we're going to look specifically in the cortex and medulla area, this is the cortex, this is the medulla, okay? These little circles are your nephrons, okay? So this one is cut so you can see the blood vessels on the inside. All right, these long tubes that descend into the medulla and then into the pelvis are the collecting ducts, okay? All right, this kind of just shows you in a kidney, pelvis, cortex, medulla, renal pyramids, and the medulla. All right, here's an image of your nephron. All right, so there's your nephron, particularly the blood vessels in here. That's the glomerulus. So we're going to introduce some more parts to you. All right, so parts of a nephron. You've got the renal corpuscle, which is composed of the glomerular capsule, also known as Bowman's capsule, and the glomerulus. You also have a renal tubule, which is composed of the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal meaning it's close to the base, which would be the glomerulus, or the, yes, in the glomerulus. And it's convoluted in the sense that it's kind of windy, okay? Then you get the loop of Henle, and then you get the distal convoluted tubule, and then the collecting duct. Okay, I'll show you. So back looking at this picture, here's our glomerulus. It's our proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. Okay. Okay. All right. So with urine formation, also known as glomerular filtration, because we're filtering at the glomerulus, your blood's going to enter the afferent arteriole and then go to the glomerulus. Your glomerular blood pressure, that pressure inside the glomerulus, is going to cause the blood to get filtered there. So things that your blood is filtering are things like water, nitrogenous waste, or basically just urea, things like that. Nutrients, things that have nitrogen in them, are nitrogenous waste. All right, nutrients, salts or ions. Okay, you have non-filtered components. They're going to leave your glomerulus by your efferent arteriole. The things that, so basically what that means is the things that your glomerulus doesn't filter just keep going through your bloodstream. Okay, and so they're going to leave your glomerulus and then go out back to the bloodstream via the efferent arteriole. So it's basically afferent arteriole, glomerulus, efferent arteriole. Okay, that's what happens with the bloodstream. So things that don't get filtered are typically things like your formed elements, your blood cells and your platelets. Okay, you really don't want your blood cells going out into your urine. All right, plasma proteins, you want to keep those. All right. So here's a image, shows you again. Here's your glomerulus, okay, on a little higher power. So here you're filtering out water, urea, glucose, amino acids, uric acid, and salts. And they're going into these glomerular, into the glomerulus, into the proximal convoluted tubule. All right, so it's all being filtered to the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. Now, here's your renal artery going to your, in your kidney, going into the afferent arteriole to the glomerulus. Okay, whatever doesn't get filtered here keeps going to the efferent arteriole. All right. We have different phases. So first you have glomerular filtration, just means you're getting filtering at the glomerulus. Then you get some tubular resorption, where nutrients and salt molecules are actively and passively reabsorbed from the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. All right, and convoluted tubules into the peritubular capillary network, which is right here. So you get some tubular reabsorption. So some of the things that get filtered out, some get filtered back into your blood. So it's a check. So because what happens if you filter out too much? So you essentially have a check to make sure you don't lose too much. Then you get some tubular secretion. All right, and so some molecules are actually secreted from the peritubular capillary network into the convoluted tubules. So some things are still being secreted out into the tubules here. Then you go to the distal convoluted tubule to the collecting duct, out to the renal pelvis to the ureter. All right, and so this is just kind of discussing what we just talked about with tubular reabsorption. So it's active and passive, occurs in your proximal convoluted tubule. So here your molecules and your ions get reclaimed from your filtrate. So things like water, nutrients, and salts. And every substance is going to have its own maximum rate of transport. There's some substances that can only be transported at a certain rate. Okay, can't go beyond that. And you have tubular secretion. Substances get removed from your blood. Things like hydrogen ions, potassium ions, creatinine, and drugs. And these this is an active process, happens in the distal convoluted tubule. So tubular reabsorption is in the proximal convoluted tubule. Tubular secretion is in the distal convoluted tubule. Again, because you don't get confused on the names, think about what happens with the glomerulus. You're getting filtration, right? Materials leaving the bloodstream going into the kidney filtration system. Okay, then you're going to get some reabsorption in the proximal convoluted tubule from that proximal convoluted tubule back into the bloodstream. Then in the distal convoluted tubule, you'll have some, basically some secretion back from the bloodstream into your distal convoluted tubule. So there's kind of a back and forth process. But also it's typically different materials that are being absorbed and reabsorbed, okay? So there's a little different things happening at each phase. All right, so let's talk about the nephron and the kidney, structures of the nephron, structures of the kidney. And you can do this with your partner at the table, or you can do this at home as well. All right, so now that we've talked about the nephron structures of the kidneys, let's talk a little bit more about regulation in the kidneys. First part of that we'll talk about is fluid and electrolyte balance. Electrolytes have to do with ions. So here your total intake of water should be equal to the total amount you lose. So how water enters your body can enter through liquids, could enter through foods, could also be some byproduct of some metabolic process in your body that release water. Well, how do you get water out? Through your urine, through your sweat. Actually can release some air as water vapor when you exhale. And through feces, actually does have water in it. Okay. So looking at the composition of your essentially kidneys, you've got the fluid in your kidneys. You have 63% intracellular fluid, extracellular fluids 37%, made up of tissue fluid, plasma, lymph, and other materials. Okay. All right. Let's talk about how your body reabsorbs water. So if you reabsorb salt, you're going to reabsorb water. Okay. So if you remember when we talked about diffusion, so sometimes salt can't move through membranes as well, but water can go across the membranes fairly easily. So water is going to be moving a lot based on salt moving in or out of your cells. So most of your water is going to be reabsorbed in your proximal convoluted tubule. So excreting your hypertonic urine in high concentration is going to be dependent on reabsorbing water, particularly at the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. So it's basically a check to make sure you don't release too much water, okay? Now there's also some hormonal control here. If you remember anti-diuretic hormone, we talked about the endocrine system. So it's causing water to get reabsorbed at your collecting duct. Also, by nature, decrease or by reabsorbing the water, you're decreasing the amount of your urine, right? Because there's going to be less water going into your urinary bladder. Okay. So this picture just shows you, think about concentration. So it says increasing solute concentration in your renal medulla. All right, so it's going to be driving water out at the loop of Henle, back into the out of your tubules into the bloodstream. Okay, at the loop of Henle. Also going to drive sodium out, okay, toward the loop of Henle and the distal convoluted tubule. All right, you're also going to be driving water out of the collecting duct, okay. So we also are going to be, in addition to reabsorbing water, we're going to be reabsorbing electrolytes. Electrolytes are things like sodium, potassium ions, bicarbonate ions, calcium ions, and phosphate ions. Okay. So in the kidneys, more than 99% of the sodium that your kidneys are filtering actually gets reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, 67% of that sodium actually gets reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule. 25% is going to get reabsorbed at the ascending loop of, or limb of the loop of Henle, okay, the part that's going up. So the remainder gets reabsorbed at the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, okay? But majority of that sodium is reabsorbed the proximal convoluted tubule and the loop of Henle. Okay, you also have some hormonal regulation of electrolyte reabsorption. So aldosterone is a hormone that promotes excretion of your sodium, or of your potassium ions, excuse me. And it promotes reabsorption of sodium and reabsorption of your water. And kidneys are gonna release renin. If your blood pressure falls too low, all right, and that, if the blood pressure is too low, it's hard to filter your blood at the glomerulus. And renin is going to convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 then gets converted to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is going to stimulate release of aldosterone, which again promotes reabsorption of sodium and water, excretes your potassium. Now, again, if you increase your sodium, increase your water in your blood, what's going to happen to your blood pressure? It goes up, it rises, right? Which is what we wanted because the blood pressure was too low. That's why we had renin being released, okay? So it's a kind of a negative feedback pattern, right? All right, you also have an atrial natriuretic hormone secreted by the atria, left and right atria of your heart, when your blood volume gets too high, okay? And that inhibits secretion of renin and aldosterone. So it's the opposite effect. Promotes the excretion of sodium and water. Because here, if the blood volume is too high, you need to decrease your volume, get rid of water and salt. Okay, so it's the opposite effect. So these HO and natriuretic hormone and aldosterone essentially have opposite effects. All right, so just another view here. Again, glomerulus, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. Okay, another view of the glomerulus. Okay, here's your afferent arteriole, efferent arteriole, distal convoluted tubule, and your proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, regulatory functions in your kidneys. So diuretics, okay, you might have heard of a diuretic. So these are chemicals that increase the flow of your urine or the patient's urine. So the things that can do that are alcohol. Caffeine can actually be a diuretic, okay, increase your urine flow, and other diuretic drugs. Okay, let's talk about regulation of acid and base balance. So with acid and base, you have buffer systems that keep your pH where it needs to be. And buffers are chemicals that take up your excess ions. So if you have too much hydrogen ions, it takes those up. If you have too much hydroxide ions, it takes that up. Because remember, hydrogen ions have to do with acid, hydroxide ions have to do with base. So an important buffer in your blood is a combination of both carbonic acid and bicarbonate. Since carbonic acid is an acid, it can take up hydroxide ions. Bicarbonate's a base, it can take up hydrogen ions. All right, you also have regulation of acid-base balance in your respiratory system. So if you increase your breathing rate, you're actually going to rid your body of hydrogen ions. You're going to release hydrogen ions by breathing quickly. And breathing can actually readjust your proportion of your carbonic acid with your bicarbonate ions in your blood. All right, so if it can actually disrupt that balance between carbonic acid and bicarbonate, and it affects your ability to maintain pH in your body. But if you think about it from a negative feedback perspective, when you're breathing hard, when you're running or exercising, you're probably building up lots of lactic acid and other things. So if you're able to get any of that into your bloodstream, get to your respiratory system, you exhale it, you're getting rid of some of that acid. So you're maintaining your balance. Okay. So there's also renal regulation of acid-base balance. Okay, so within the kidney itself, okay, can rid your body of wide range of acidic substances and basic substances. Okay, it's slower than the other systems. You have a more powerful effect on your pH, measure of your acidity. You can reabsorb the bicarbonate ions. You can excrete hydrogen ions as you need to maintain your normal pH. So ammonia is a buffer, and phosphate ions are a buffer for hydrogen ions that are in your urine. All right, because hydrogen ions are acid, ammonia and phosphate ions are basic. Okay. All right, so here you're seeing bicarbonate moving from the kidney tubules to the capillaries. All right, hydrogen ions are moving from the capillaries into the kidney tubules, combining with ammonia, making NH4+. Okay, so regulating acid and base balance. All right, so next time we will start off with problems with kidney function now that we've kind of discussed how kidneys normally function. Okay, so you can do your exit tickets now, and we will see you in the next video.